On today's show, how good is Aron Kiviharju? We look at the left-handed Finnish defenseman on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kelikesh, Director of North American Scouting for Dobber Prospects, joined by Sebastian High, Director of European Scouting and Head Scout for Dobber Prospects. And on today's show, we will be breaking down Aron Kiviharju's game in detail. The prospect spotlight is on him for today's episode. We'll look at the Finnish left-handed defenseman's puck skills, his profile in the first segment, along with his skating and physicality. In our second segment, we'll focus more on the toolkit, the habits, and the decision-making, some of the more intricate stuff in Kiviharju's game. And in our third segment, we'll break down the projection, the upside, and which team would be the best fit for Aron Kiviharju in the NHL. We'll also look at where he ends up on draft day, where he's likely to get drafted and all that good stuff. Now, he's a difficult player to pin down because he's missed so much time, but with a bit more of a good look at him at this U18 World since he's been back, we felt comfortable putting out a prospect spotlight. Before I get into any of that, though, today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admitted to have a competitive side, and it's a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, as always, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get things started with the profile here for Aron Kiviharju. Now, taking a quick look at him at the CO Worlds, he looks bigger than he's listed, right? I think he's listed at 5'10", $170, something like that.
He is indeed. He's listed at 5'10", 172. This is an 18-year-old left shot defenseman who looks a lot closer to 6 feet 180 here at the tournament. That's certainly one thing that he seemingly spent some time on while he was out with injury, was sticking in the weight room a little bit. He looks a lot more solidly built, and an element of that is certainly the fact that we're used to seeing him against professional competition, and he's now playing against junior competition, so he just looks larger proportionally speaking compared to the other players on the ice here. But I'm very curious to see where he ends up being listed at the combine for that reason. But he's been playing some solid hockey here since returning, but he's had a very short season in terms of draft year seasons. He only played 7 league games in Liga with HIFK, where he logged a solitary goal and an assist. And in that time, he was consistently exploited defensively. There were a lot of concerns going out there of what his game was beyond just being a really high-end passer and reading the game very well, and being very intelligent, passing the puck very well, but in all 3 zones, really. Like, he's a strong breakout artist, and in the offensive zone, he's a talented distributor. That's been very clear since he was a 16-year-old playing at the World Junior Championship. But he's now back from injury, and he's kind of taken off where he left off in terms of international play with Finland. He's been the captain of this Finnish team, and he's been the fulcrum of their play, but at 5-on-5 and on the power play as well, where he's being flanked by both Konsta Helenius and Emil Hemming, Finland's 2 most dangerous offensive weapons.
For sure. Now, to get into the puck skills, I think there's a lot to talk about here, but the primary standout for me is the passing. He's one of the best, if not the best, breakout passer in this draft. Like, his ability to select options coming out of his zone and choose the right player, hit him in stride, hit him hard and accurately, is amazing. It's both a decision-making factor, but also just a pure passing skill factor. So for me, the passing ability, I mean, it doesn't limit itself to the breakout zone, to breakouts either. He passes really good in the offensive zone, makes really smart little kind of passes off the boards when he's kind of leaned on defensively in his own zone. He's really good at spinning off of pressure down low and making a pass quickly. So for me, the passing gets a 7.5. Like, I'm a big fan of the passing ability. The shot itself, I think, is less of a standout. Like, for me, it's maybe a 5.5, perhaps. I like the selection, not the power. And the handling skill really stands out, though, right?
Yeah, I say that the handling is definitely a notch above the goal scoring in terms of the raw tools, but it doesn't quite come close to the playmaking. It's closer to the scoring than it is to the playmaking in
Yeah.
terms of puck skills here. But I'd give him like a sixth grade. There's some games where he flashes 6.5 upside in terms of the handling skill. Like he's very selective. Like the intelligence really permeates his entire on puck game. His selection of the right deke at the right time in the right situation is quite consistently strong. I would say in terms of raw handling ability, it's perhaps a little bit lower, but he knows how to get the very most out of what he has in terms of the handling skill.
For sure. And in terms of skating, I think that's a major standout as well. He's a really fluid skater. I love the edge work. I love the ability to pivot quickly. Again, his cutbacks off the boards down low in his own zone when he retrieves a puck. I mean, the issue with Kiviharju is getting to that puck and not getting pushed off, right? But once he establishes possession, he's really good at spinning off of pressure and finding an option quickly. And that's been the real standout for me in the games that I've watched so far in this tournament and the games I watched earlier on this year in September before he got injured, but also the games he played last year in the Finnish Liga, because he was 16 years old playing Finnish Liga hockey. Like, this is rare for a defenseman, and there's a reason for it. It's because he's just so good at those particular things. But yeah, his skating gets a 7.5 for me as well. It's a really plus element of his game. The edge work is great, the mobility is great. But the physicality is really where things start to crumble a bit for Kiviharju, right?
Yeah, like, I think one more thing I'll add to the skating is that I think that the agility is definitely like a 7.5 grade. I'd say the stride mechanics are probably closer to a six. Like the amount of
Mhm.
power he generates in stride isn't the strongest in the world, but this also correlates as well with the physicality that you just mentioned, right? Like
Yeah.
there's been a distinct lack of lower body strength in his game dating back the last couple seasons, and I have seen a jump of that at this tournament, but it hasn't been astronomical. As you mentioned, when he's like pressured really intensely by especially professional forecheckers, he can be really overwhelmed physically and lose pucks. And the mistakes he's made at the Liga level have often come when he's been under that intense physical, like body on body pressure.
Yeah.
He's not really deer in the headlights when plays in front of him, but when it's like on top of him, it's a bit of a different story.
Yeah.
But yeah, like there's a lack of that ability of winning those puck battles at the net front. He's not the defenseman that you're going to task with clearing the net front to make sure that your goaltender has a sight line. He's more the player you want to send out behind the net to corral a loose puck, spring a quick breakout. But yeah, the physical aspect of this game is definitely still a bit of a work in progress, but it's not like a detrimental aspect either, I don't think.
Yeah, no, 100%. But yeah, I think the main issue for me with the physical elements is you're looking at a player who is often going to be in situations where he's drawing in pressure. At the NHL level, drawing in pressure means being able to take a hit. It's necessary. And I think Kiwiharu's at his best when he's drawing in pressure, when he's attracting players to him in order to open up space behind him. He's really good at releasing that pass just before he gets hit. But as he reaches the NHL, those gaps are going to close a lot quicker. There's going to be less ice to cover to get to him as well in the NHL versus the Liga. There's a bunch of factors like that that make me wonder how effective he's going to be down low, because again, this is a player who excels down low. He's at his best when he's got the puck, but behind his own goal line and he makes a decision. No one does it like him in this draft. The issue is once he gets to the NHL, there's going to be more and more scenarios like that, but he's gonna have shorter and shorter amounts of time to make decisions and less time before he gets clobbered, right? Especially if he's playing on a bottom pair to start off his career against career fourth liners, career third liners, who, I mean, all they do is just run after you and hit you into the boards, right? Like that's my concern. But I think a lot of his potential rests on his ability to improve that specific aspect of his game. But that wraps it up for our first segment. We'll get into our second, where we talk more about the details in Kiviharju's game. We'll talk about the toolkit, the habits, the decision making, how his tools interact, all that good stuff in just a second. Just before a quick word from our sponsors at Monopoly Go. I'll admit it, I have a competitive side, and my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It is a great twist on Monopoly, where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is messing with my friends. I can charge them rent on my iconic properties, just like classic Monopoly, but now I can also heist their vaults for riches for myself. And their leaderboards show me who's the biggest Monopoly tycoon at any time. But it's not just my competitive side that loves it. You can actually team up with your friends and people all around the world in time tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. Alrighty, so getting into our second segment, we'll be talking about the more intricate stuff in Kiviharju's game, and I think we have a lot to talk about here. I think we can start with the toolkit. For me, the agility and the breakout passing just gel so well. I think that's really, I mean, we'll say it again and again. The breakout game is Kiviharju's bread and butter, but for me, it's a combination of his hands, his feet, and and his brain just all being on the same page when he's breaking out the puck, right?
For sure, there's a very high end level of pace in the way he's able to blend those things. He makes quick decisions. He makes quick reads and smart reads in that quick period of time. And on top of that, has the agility of making those really quick split second adjustments when he is being pressured. I think a clear distinction is when he's being pressured with play in front of him, he is a maestro. When he's being pressured with his back to the play on those retrievals where he's not able to pivot right away before the pressure arrives, that's where you see a lot more of his mistakes happening, which is the case for most players, of course, at this age. But I'd say it's a bit more accentuated in Kiviharju's game compared to other draft eligibles. But it's also because of just how brightly he shines when he is facing play. When he sees everything that is evolving, he consistently makes the right decision and the right little play to create a little bit of space, whether it be for himself or through a pass. And the selection there is really intelligent.
For sure, yeah. I think selection is the right word. Like he chooses the right play so often, and he doesn't settle for the play in front of him. He can see options opening up before they do. That part of his game is really impressive. That's why his offensive sense for me is probably his highest graded tool. Like for me, it's an 8 when it's on. It's just, again, this is a player who struggles a lot physically, who doesn't have the most separating tools in terms of physical tools. And isn't comfortable deking out of pressure as well as, for example, obviously a Quinn Hughes, a Lane Hudson, those kind of guys. They compensate for their lack of physical tools with really high-end deceptiveness and agility and those kinds of tools. I don't see as much of that with Kiviharju, but overall, when it comes to choosing a play out of his zone, no one in this draft does it like Kiviharju. It's a really good element of his game. I do also want to talk about the habits, because the habits are pretty interesting with Kiviharju. This is a player who consistently cuts across pressure. Even when pressured with his back to the play, even when he's facing the boards, he's still looking at finding a way to cut across a defenseman, a forechecker's skates before trying to break the puck out. And I think that's where he gets kind of stuck at times. It's the right decision. It's just I don't think he times it as well, does he?
Yeah, like I think as you mentioned, he can try to make like a slightly flashy play at times in terms of going against the grain, as you mentioned, which would immediately gain a ton of separation between himself and that forechecker, which would then buy him space. And sometimes he doubles down on that when just keeping his body between the opponent and the puck would be the wiser decision in terms of just generating a breakout. Even if he gets pinned along the boards a little bit, he often has a little bit more support in those situations that he can use. And it's not always the prettiest solutions, right? But he plays a bit of a junior game in that sense still, where he's trying to make the big play to gain a lot of separation to just immediately bomb up the ice. And he also lacks, like, in terms of his physical tools, I think one thing that is lacking in his game is that ability to separate. It's that, like, the lack of that explosive two-step acceleration, but also in terms of the handling he uses. He's really good at picking the right handling move to get around an individual forechecker, but in terms of separating from a player who's marking him, he doesn't gain a ton of ground on them no matter what he really does. So apart from going with those really quick give and goes, which are just obscenely useful as well because they work at the NHL level for a reason. But yeah, there's definitely still elements in this game that are raw in terms of those habits, in terms of that he is so intelligent and he makes very intelligent decisions, but there's an element of immaturity in that still as well. And it's part of the reason why he still struggled quite a bit in those 7 games against Liga competition this season. Him and Adam Jiricek were two defensemen on that European side who show a ton of upside, some really intriguing tools, but whose actual performances against pro competition and very small sample sizes this season just weren't very good.
For sure. Yeah, I'm on the same page as you regarding that. I think that, obviously the sample size needs to be taken into consideration, but we have to consider that this is a player who has been playing since he was 16 in Liga and hasn't really looked in his element so far in that time. Even last year, there were times where I'm just just send him down. This is, he was getting bullied on the forecheck. He could not handle back pressure. But again, 16 years old playing in Liga, that's what you'd expect. It's very rare for players like that age playing in that league to perform at a high level. So not too worrying, but at the same time, it's just, I would have liked to see that player in his element, right? I think that would have been the right thing to do. I also want to talk about that decision making because, again, as we mentioned, the breakout game is absurd with Kiviharju, always making the right decisions, always pushing the puck to the right spots on the breakout. What do you think of his offensive zone decision making and also his rush defending scenarios? How does he choose plays on those sides?
Yeah, I mean, obviously 2 very different realms. So let's start with the rush defending. I think it's a weaker element of his game compared to his play on the cycle specifically in the offensive zone. His rush defending, he has the mobility to really be more effective against the rush than he is at this stage. He's a little bit passive because he likes seeing the entirety of the play. He's not overly aggressive in his entry prevention. But when he does choose to close his gaps, he will time that very well. He'll make sure that it'll happen. For instance, when a player bobbles the puck, he will read that immediately and go attack him when that happens. But he often waits a little bit too long waiting for that little opening rather than creating an opening himself. He's not overly decisive and deliberate always in his rush defending. He can kind of just wait and especially at the pro level, puck rushers aren't going to make a simple mistake like bobbling a puck very often. So he's often, I felt, very passive and just backing himself up backwards. And then when he's passive and also when he stops moving defensively against the cycle, it's when he's at his worst defensively. When he stops moving, he stops being effective. And I think that there's definitely some room to grow in his entry prevention as a rush defender because there is that mobility, there is that intelligence, there is the decent stick work that he's been able to show. And while he doesn't lack that physical element, you don't have to be the player that throws a big hit against the rush to be effective in defending the rush. Whereas in the offensive zone, he's more of a distributor than he is a raw playmaker. He's not going to necessarily activate up to hash marks and send a pinpoint pass in through multiple sticks to a player at the net front, but he is a really, really calculated distributor, especially at the top, at the blue line on the power play. We've seen it at this tournament with Emil Hemming and Konsta Helenius. He is the beating, alongside them, he's the beating heart of that power play. It's really those 3 players that decide what happens on that power play, and they're all on the same level in terms of ideas that they're having and what they're trying to create. But Kiviharju is also the one who decides on which flank next attack is going to occur, and I think he's done a tremendous job of that so far this tournament. He's consistently reading defensive structures, making a little fake to get defenders to shift their weight in one direction and quickly pass it the other direction, and immediately there's enough space for a player as skilled as Helenius or Hemming to make something out of it. So he's quite solid as a distributor, but again, as a raw playmaker, I think that his passing ability it carries a bit more weight in that transition in terms of like guiding play offensively rather than creating those high dangerous scoring chances on his own.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's I don't know, there's a part of his game that really, he excels in decision making when it comes to breaking out of his zone. But once you get to the offensive zone, I don't see as much anticipation. I don't see as much forward thinking in terms of, like you said, playing give and goes, dropping down the board, dropping down the boards, making a play to the slot. He doesn't see the incremental step by step elements in the offensive zone and in rush defending. He's very reactive versus proactive. In the two scenarios we outlined, the offensive zone and rush defending. But either way, that's our second segment done. We'll talk about our third segment where we'll get into our third segment where we talk about the projection, the upside, which team would be the best fit, and where Aron Kiviharju ends up on draft day in terms of draft slot. We'll get into that in a second, just before a quick word from our sponsors at FanDuel.
It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, same game parlays, and far more. I know I'm personally always a really big fan of same game parlays, especially when I'm attending an event live. It makes the action all the more exciting. To carefully select a couple stats to stake your money on and take your big swing on the bet, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
Alrighty, so to close things off here with our final segment, we'll look at Aron Kiviharju's projection, his upside, and which team would be the best fit for him. So let's start with the projection. There's a lot of different outcomes for me with Kiviharju. I see him very much as a specialist, but a specialist whose other areas aren't, I'd say, strong enough in order to solidify and 100%ify, if you will, his NHL odds, right? Like this is a player who is, again, one of the best breakout passers in the draft. I think he's really, really good at it, and I think that's his ticket to the next level. If he can further support that with improving his ability to make plays with his back to make decent plays with his back to the play, that's a big step forward in terms of even further uplifting his breakout ability. But that's his ticket. It's just about how much he adds around that as well. We've already said he looks a bit bigger than he was listed, and he looks bigger than he looked at the start of the year. He's looking closer to around 6'1", 180 now. Physicality shouldn't be as much of an issue to add and build around when you've got that kind of average frame. So for me, the projection, I mean, I could see Kiviharju becoming a top 4 defenseman. I could also see him not making the NHL. But I think the likely outcome for Kiviharju is you're looking at a bottom 4 defenseman. Like, I don't think this is a player who's ever going to play on a first pair, but either a number 4, number 5, number 6, I could see as very realistic for Kiviharju. Do you agree?
I would. I think him being a specialist in terms of like that breakout game, and he could even like QB a second power play, for instance. But in terms of like offensive zone draws, if you want a defenseman who is relatively fresh, hasn't played 20 minutes that game yet, to kind of quarterback an offensive sequence and that you trust to retain possession and to create some offense and to bring in the other offensive elements on the ice to create something, I think he's a really good shout for that type of role. But I would agree that the upside is probably capped there as like a number 3 if you're optimistic, number 4 if you're not. But as you mentioned, there's a chance that he's not an NHLer at all as well. So there's quite a wide range of potential outcomes here. And I think it's one of the reasons that he might get some decent traction as well at the end of day 1 at the draft is that he's a little bit of a wild card. He's been on the radar of teams for the last like 2 to 3 years. And on top of that, it has been just plummeting down rankings, not entirely in a fault of his own, right? It's also because he's been injured and there hasn't been much game tape going around. But this tournament, captaining Finland and seemingly not having missed a beat in terms of staying up at the same pace of playing with players that have been playing professionally all season long in Emil Hemming and Konsta quite impressive. So I could see a contending team take a swing on him late in the first round, but I doubt he goes top 20 here.
Yeah, for sure. I think the other thing for me with Kiviharju is you're looking at a player who not only has been playing pro for like longer than 90% of the people in the player of the prospects in this draft, but you're also looking at a prospect who really thinks the game at a level that is really difficult to emulate or replicate. And that experience at the pro level, I think, has certainly helped. But yeah, in terms of projection, I think that might help. I don't know if teams will end up going for him in the first round, but I can't stop thinking of Timothy Liljegren when I think of Aron Kiviharju. Their situations are fairly similar in terms of why they plummeted, where they ended up on draft day. Like I wouldn't be surprised if Kiviharju is like one of the first picks of the second round, just like Liljegren was, right? So we'll see how that works out. But in terms of upside, we've already mentioned that. I think that optimistically a number 3 defenseman would probably be like the top end of that. I don't know if Kiviharju ever plays on the top pair, but if he does, it's going to be as a weaker element on a top pair, as a real number 2 on a middling, maybe even kind of struggling NHL team. Like that's the highest I think his outcome goes. But on a contender, the optimistic outcome's a number 3 for sure. In terms of fits, we've got a bunch of options here in terms of best NHL fits. We mentioned Liljegren, and I think the Leafs could turn Kiviharju into something really interesting, right?
Yeah, I think they could. They definitely need some more puck moving than they currently have on their blue line, as is being made painfully obvious in this series against the Boston Bruins,
Yeah.
where they have about, what, 1.5 puck moving defensemen in their lineup at the moment. It has been pretty ugly on that front, in the
Yeah.
breakout especially. But I think that the Colorado Avalanche would be a team that I'd be curious about, and they have a late first rounder this year that they haven't traded away at slot to
Mhm.
go at around that 25 range. I could see them as being a team that'll take a reach relative to where Kiviharju might go, which would be second round range. But I could see them taking that type of swing. They love their Finnish players, but they'll also be taking a swing on the combination of really good mobility, really high intelligence, and a lot of growing room in terms of skill and the application of that skill, which I think is a trifecta that the Avs would really like. And he could also be a potential long-term replacement for a guy like Sam Girard in terms of like a second pairing puck moving defenseman long-term.
For sure. Yeah. I also look at the LA Kings and think, if you want to pair someone up with Brant Clark, great pairing there. But other than that, I mean, they've got a couple options. I don't know if they have anyone on his level of puck moving ability in their system. So I'd be fairly interested to see what he ends up doing in that roster as well. The LA Kings would be fairly interesting. The Calgary Flames need a defenseman. And I think that, if you're betting on upside in that range of the draft, late first, early second. I think Kiviharju is up there with the best in terms of overall potential and ability to impact play. So there's a couple options there for me in terms of NHL teams that could really help him. But in terms of, I'd say the team that would help him the most would be the Leafs. I think that would be the team that benefits his game the most. It depends on where they go with their structure in terms of, does Sheldon Keefe stick around? Do they get tired of the whole core 4 not working out, losing in the playoffs and not being able to stick around and make an impact? But I feel like they could take his game and help it reach the next level. Like for me, Timothy Liljegren and Rasmus Sandin are 2 examples of defensemen that, I mean, they outshone their potential. Like for me with Liljegren, he was a long shot at his point in his progression to make the NHL, and they worked really hard with him to make him a bona fide NHLer and a really good one. Same thing with Rasmus Sandin. Like it took some time, but they got him up to a level where he was performing for them for quite a while before his trade to Washington. So yeah, I mean, I think we could do a lot with Kiviharju. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all our news and updates about what's going on around sports on a 24/7 YouTube channel over on YouTube there. And make sure to tune in for our next shows as we continue our prospect coverage for the month of May. This has been Hadi Kalakash, Director of North American Scouting for Dobber Prospects, with Sebastian High, Director of European Scouting and Head Scout for Dobber Prospects. And we hope to see you next time.